500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die."
G'day, this is X-Band, the Fantasy Podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com, and you can subscribe to our podcast via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps. Do not forget to give us a rating on your podcast app and tell a mate about us. Now, in episode 201, we spoke with Andreas Eriksson, who gave us an insight on what was to happen in the year 2022 with Fantomen. Now, he also gave us a huge hint about the Heart of Darkness book, which was very well received by a lot of the fans. Now, they were, especially the Fantomen readers, enjoyed the podcast a lot. So this year, we decided we're going to do it again with Andreas, but we're not just going to have Andreas, we're going to also have Jacob as well. Now, some may wonder, who is Jacob? And if that is you and you're not sure who that is, that will be answered soon. However, let's introduce the regulars. And it is just me from Australia, because this is going to be majorly more of a Swedish focus. So we've flicked Dan and Steve, and we've replaced him with Mikael, who is also our Fantomen correspondent, who reviews all our Fantomen comics and reports on all the news from out of Scandinavia. So Mikael has the daunting task to help me ask all the hard questions. So g'day, Mikael, how are you?
Good day, thank you for having me, and yeah, I'm fine. Looking forward to getting all the nasty details of Fantomen 2023.
Well, hopefully it's not nasty, but it's good details.
All the gritty ones, yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully I look forward to having a bombshell announcement like Andreas was able to give us last year. So the pressure is on both of them. Should we make them give us one each, or do you reckon one will be enough, Mikael?
Yeah, one each, of course.
One each? Okay, we'll see what we can do. All right, so Jacob, so I'll introduce you first. Now, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Here, it's been a while since I've been on a podcast, so I'm a bit nervous, but I'm sure it's going to be great.
Well, on this podcast, we like to make it kind of casual, and so it's just like sitting around a bar with some mates talking Phantom. So hopefully, I know it's in the middle of the day and it's not quite 5 o'clock for you guys over there yet, but I appreciate you joining us. Now, quickly, I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your age, your history with the comics and the Phantom, and then just tell us a little bit what your actual role is.
Yeah. So my name is Jacob Habinc. I'm 28, turning 29 this year. And my role at Egmont is that I am the project leader / editor-in-chief for Fantomen and several other magazines as well. But Fantomen is like one of the main ones that I work with like most frequently. And I guess a good way to describe it is because, Mikael Lyck, who had my role before, he had a bit more agency when it came to the Phantom. I think he worked with a little less amount of other magazines as well. But when he quit and Andreas came in together with me, Andreas was already working with the Phantom as well, but he got more responsibility, so it's kind of split between the two of us. And I usually say that if Andreas is the one who like holds the wheel of the Fantomen car and like goes forward, I'm the one who hits the brakes, and sometimes I pull and swerve to like try to steer the project going. But I feel like me and Andreas like control the way together, like simultaneously. And my relationship with the Phantom is not that deep as our readers or this podcast. I didn't really read much of the Phantom as a child. Like, if you're Swedish, you know about Fantomen. Like, people think he is a Swedish hero. So I was always aware, but I never really knew the whole story. I knew that my dad he read the Fantomen when he was a kid. So I think he was more excited than me when I got the job.
That is awesome.
But since then, because I mean, I first covered for Mikael in 2019, I think. Because he was on sick leave, so I came in for half a year together with Andreas, and I worked for half a year before he got back. And when he ultimately quit, I came in and took over. So now I've been working with it for 2 years, almost, maybe even 3 if you count the first months. And since then, I've like really grown to like the Phantom, like the whole world, the whole concept behind the like generations and stuff. It was much richer than I expected, because I always just saw him as the blue guy in the jungle. I didn't know more than that. I just knew that he was some kind of hero in the jungle. So it's been a wild ride to like get to know this world, and as you hinted before we started recording, also delve down and like write some stories as well, which I've really enjoyed.
Awesome. So we won't get into too much detail, because I would love to have you on another podcast and delve more into, you know, your world, Jacob's world. But I can't remember. So you've also written some stories. Is that very similar as like what Mikael was doing before, is to kind of keep the budget down?
Well, more or less. Also because I'm a comic book artist from the beginning.
Okay.
That's how I got the job when they were looking for a guy to fill in the spot. They contacted my school, which was a comic book school, where they like headhunted me. So I've always been writing stories and stuff. So when I got the opportunity, I think first Mikael asked if I wanted to write some stories, and then he gave me that whole spiel about like, yeah, you can do that to keep the budget down, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's a win-win for me, you know, like I get to express myself creatively, and I get to deliver more stories to the readers. So yeah.
Okay, so I didn't know that you're an artist. So have you thought about drawing the Phantom, or is that?
I mean, I've thought about it, but I'm not that kind of artist. In Sweden, we have a strong tradition of comic book artists not knowing how to write good, like or draw good. Like the drawings are pretty crappy, but the story is amazing. You know, like very heart, like how do you say it? Like autobiographical and heart-wrenching stories. So I'm more from that kind of like alternative scene. So I can't like I will never be able to to draw it, but writing I can do.
Cool. So I don't believe any of your stories have been published in the Free comic yet. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I know that one of the comics have been sent over to Fru.
Okay.
But I have no idea which number it's planned for, if it's this year or the next year. I've only done one full length one and then 2 shorter ones, which I don't think they're that interested in.
Okay. All right. Well, when that gets published by Fru, I think we'll definitely have to come you on and discuss more about your world. So so I appreciate your time. Mikael, have you got any questions you want to ask Jacob before we talk to Andreas?
Not at this time. Thank you.
No. So Andreas has been on the podcast a few times. Now, for those who've come in late, myself and Andreas, we've known each other for, I reckon it's a good 20 odd years.
Yeah.
I think our first interaction was actually a bit of an Ivan style forum war. And then we got told off by Garan, and then we've become friends ever since.
Yeah.
So I think I've been thinking about this. I actually think it was about the old forkism versus modernism. I think it might have been about that. Do you remember that, Andreas?
No, that's something that I have put away and don't look back at. Those were some intense days in the old Phantom forum, which had good and bad sides. I think that, well, I can about myself a little bit. I'm a fan originally. I started reading the Phantom when I was very young. The Phantom wasn't my first big comic book favorite, but the one that outlasted the others. But like for everyone else, other interests come up over time, and you sort of don't have the time for everything. And it's quite usual for readers and fans to drop off like in their late teens or something. But one thing that kept me going was that was when when the internet came, and you sort of saw. I got in touch with other collectors online and the Phantom forum and the debates that were going on there, and you sort of realized that I'm not the only one who is very dedicated and have strong opinions on this. Of course, that's also how I came in contact with Mikael. The Scandinavian chapter started around the year 2000. I actually, before the internet days, I was very early with trading comics with foreign collectors. So that's also something that kept my interest going, that even though I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I would receive a package from America when Moonstone started, or when something else came before that. And I would get the package from Australia to see what Fru was doing. And I always thought it was kind of funny when Fru was publishing the Team Fantomen stories. I mean, it was cool to see mainly Swedish creators or stories created in Sweden being reprinted in another country in another language. So that was like my focus as a collector, to find foreign editions. So I kept my interest going, partially thanks to the internet connections, but then as you imply, Jermayn, sometimes it can be a bit fanboyish. You sort of get locked down in some discussions that aren't really doing very much positive. Basically, it's sometimes good to take a step back. And Mikael and Jacob have that in common. They were not huge fans of the Phantom, and I think that has been kind of a benefit when you're in that position, because if you are too big of a fan, you can't see it as a job, and you can't shut down when you leave the office and go home. And I think it's good to have that distance when you are in the decision-making position, because you may have to do some decisions that are tough. If you're a fan, it's tough to make some of the decisions that you can't really control yourself. There are outside factors that are determining what you have to do, and if you're going to be a good decision maker, you can't be too emotionally involved. So Jacob is handling all the important decisions, and I'm the emotional fanboy who is crying, and he just ignores me if he has to.
Brilliant. That was probably going to be the first. Obviously, you've got both of you. You're both writers. You're both in the editorial team and the project team and stuff like that as well. Now, Andreas, we've talked a little bit about you as a writer before. I would love to, and as well as Jacob, I would love to be able to have dedicated podcasts about your actual, your personal worlds rather than your day job world, which is what we're talking about now. So we might park some of those questions, unless, Mikael, do you have another question to Andreas? Or
yeah, I just got so curious about this fanboy editor thing. You have talked a lot more with Ulf than I have done. Do you think Ulf was a fanboy when he started as an editor for Fantomen?
Well, not at the same level as you and me or Jermayn either. I think that he also had he has written about that in some editorial pieces, that he was the Phantom, he was aware of it, he had read it, it was not his favorite. When he was offered to work on the Phantom, he took a look at it and, what can I do with this, and he got some ideas and it took off from there. But no, I don't think that he was a fanboy as we have been, and again, that made it possible for him to think outside the box and try new things, because I also think that a lot of fans, you sort of get stuck in what you like, regardless if you're a Lee Falk fan or a Team Fantomen fan or a Fru fan. You know what you like, and if you are put in the position to make decisions, you're going to make the decisions that repeat what you have already liked, instead of trying new things and finding new fans, which is vital for any publication in any time, but especially for the Phantom in this time.
And that's a very, very good point. I would say Ulf and also Jim were able to do that really, really good for both Fantomen, but also for Fru as well, where they were able to create those new fans, which Mikael will have to ask. We'll have to put that down, ask them how they can make some new fans. That's a good question, which we'll come back to. But I think that's where they were, because I don't think both of them were fans, like they knew of it, but I think they became attached to the Phantom. But I don't reckon they were fanboys like us. Good question.
Like, inevitable, right? To become a fan when you work that much with it. Because I'm already attached to the world, not to the same extent, of course, but still, just by working and like having it in the back of your mind, it grows on you. So
yeah. So another question, like, do you use like, I sort of know the answer for Andreas, because I think I've talked to him about this, but as writers and in your role, do you kind of like see a story on TV or in the newspaper or on the internet and go, "Oh, I could maybe make this into a Phantom story or something like that"? Do you do that?
Yeah, definitely. Like the first story that I wrote, the longer one, that both Mikael and Andreas had read. I think I even wrote it to Andreas when I first pitched it or showed it to him. That I don't remember if it was like on Instagram or some other social media, where I saw some short video about interesting places or interesting facts, and I got taught a thing about this natural phenomenon called I think it was liminal eruption or something. I'm not going to go into and explain what that is, but it was like a very interesting natural catastrophe that I've never heard about. And then I started to get ideas, and that became what the story was about. And I have another one that I've read, or that I'm writing now, that might come out this year or next year, where I also like read a book about philosophy or something, and it was like just a concept that was so interesting that I couldn't stop thinking about, and I had to like get it out of my system into the pages, So definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah,
and Mikael,
same for me.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Andreas, sorry.
Yeah, same for me, but it doesn't have to be like the focus of the whole story. I mean, sometimes you see something on TV or the news, and it just becomes a little ingredient in a bigger story, or the missing piece of the puzzle. Like sometimes I've had the idea for a story apart from what the villain is motivated by. So I know what's going to happen in the story, but I don't know what the villain is going to do. And then there's a new story about, here you have bank robbers, and they're using this method. My villain is going to be a bank robber, and they're going to do it like that new story. But I already had the rest of the story planned out.
Interesting. I'm sure there's plenty of other questions we will ask at a later date. But listeners, as as we talked about before, this podcast is specifically going to be about Phantom 2023 and beyond. So now you've kind of touched upon it already. Could you go into a little bit more detail about your different roles of the Phantom magazine, like where your strengths are and how they interrelate with each other as well?
Yeah. As Andreas mentioned, I do the hard decisions.
I thought you were going to say you did the hard work.
Yeah, no. That's definitely Andreas. I don't do the hard work. I just do the shitty decisions and take the blame. No, but I think it's like a worldly phenomenon right now that, like, there's inflation everywhere. Everything goes up in price, and that affects the comic book market significantly, and the paper press is dying worldwide. And that's something we have to have in mind when we're doing this magazine, and that's where the hard choices come up for me, because I work with the budget as well. So me and Andreas, every beginning of, not even the beginning of the year, maybe in October or September, we start talking about the next year, and we make up a plan of what can we reprint, what through stories do we want to do, how many newly produced stories are we going to do. And I'd say it would be Andreas' role to come up with the ideal lineup for the stories, and then I do some math and take half of them and say, we'll put that in a later year, or we'll never do this. So it works within the budget. And for this year specifically, we've had to put our brains together and really think of how can we because we want to maximize every year. We had that as a goal last year, that we wanted to have a new story technically in every issue of Fantomen. And we always want to try to do something like that, so it keeps fresh and interesting, and so it feels like the people who are working on the magazine really do care. Because the last thing we want to do is just do reprint after reprint and turn the magazine into a zombie magazine where nothing new happens. If you catch my drift.
Yeah. So you may mention last year there was a news story, and I'm assuming a news story includes a through story, so a news story for Fantomen readers.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the case? Sorry, is that going to be the case for 2023 as well?
No, I don't think we've established that kind of rule for ourselves. This year we're focusing a lot on what do you call them in English? Other stories but the Phantom, because I don't know how it's in the through Phantom.
Oh, you're talking about the backup stories,
exactly.
Was it Carla Kemp and?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thorgel, a lot of French comics, because we have a great relationship with those publishing houses, and it's been a staple of Fantomen for years. And I feel like the first year I was working with the Phantom, I maybe put that on the back burner because I wasn't too comfortable yet with making those decisions and contacting other publishing houses. But now that I'm a bit more sure of myself in the role, we've taken a lot of new and old classic comics from France. So it might be a bit more of that than usual. But other than that, we've been focusing a lot on through as well, I'd say, because I think the through stories have become better and better just between the years when I started and right now, and they produce so much as well compared to what we can do on our budget. We're taking a lot from them, and they're taking stuff from us. So that's basically how it's been.
I'm not sure if you're allowed to answer this, but do you kind of do a story for a story to kind of keep the budgets and stuff down, or as much as you're allowed to tell me, what's the arrangement?
Not explicitly. It's not like we we say I'll trade you this for that, but we have discussions that fix that stuff. No comment, as you said.
There's our first no comment.
You should have a counter in the corner, like no comment counter.
I reckon.
But-
well, hopefully we get less no comments than from Jacob than what we did from you last year, Andreas.
Yeah.
But regarding the budget, I mean the dying of the printed press, that's hard to go around, but I remember reading that like during the pandemic, the sales of Fantomen went up, or at least stayed the same. Is that still going on, or has that changed now after everyone's out?
That has changed. I mean, because there was like an unprecedented situation where people had to be indoors and, you know, picked up different hobbies, and reading comics is a pretty good hobby to do when you can't move. But you know, with the war in Ukraine and
Electricity
prices have also skyrocketed. I mean, it's, even though it feels like the pandemic is still ongoing, there's just this year and last year, there's been so many different geopolitical things that affect the market in like more ways than you maybe first realized, you know. So yeah, even though I think maybe there are still people who like started subscribing during the pandemic that are still subscribing, I think just in general it's going downward. There might be spikes, but it's slowly going down.
Yeah, because it feels like all of these are out of your hands, and
yeah,
I mean, it must be really, yeah, of course. So it must be really hard to counteract that, like sales going down because of this and the costs going up. So yeah,
especially since like comic like magazines, the collectors, they want everything, but if you're not a collector, putting some extra money on a magazine can feel quite useless. So we had to like somehow find the readers or try to like profit from in other ways. And in that way, for example, the Heart of Darkness book was a good example of that, because we know that collectors and people who value art, like comic book art more in general, even if you're not a Phantom fan, to have that kind of brick in your library really, you know, it's something else. It feels more valuable than a magazine to some extent. So we tried to like get into that market of deluxe versions, because that's a trend we've seen in every publishing house, both in comics and in like art books in general. Yeah, there it is.
So if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to, sorry, I've just been trying to rummage through my room. You'll be able to find it here. Now, you called it a brick. Now, this is an amazing book. What's actually interesting is last year we saw this, but we also saw the Mitten, John Van Mitten book or something?
Yeah,
like
Mitten, yeah.
So that's, and I've called on the podcast that this would be probably a top 5, maybe a top 10 best Phantom published book ever. So what are you going to do for 2023? How are you going to top this?
Well, I can say that, I mean, we printed 1,000 copies of this book. Do you know which number you have there? Does it say?
Oof. I don't know. Mikael got 223.
Oh, that's a good number. But we pressed, we published 1,000 copies of that, and we've made our money back. It's almost sold out. Just telling the people who are listening, you don't have it. It's almost sold out, and that's amazing, considering it was pretty expensive to produce and pretty expensive to sell. And you know, from a market point of view, if something sells, why wouldn't you do it again, right?
Exactly.
I like what I'm hearing.
Yes, I do as well. So we're talking about it. We might as well talk about the elephant or the big book in the room. So and I know you probably can't say everything, but can you tell us anything about what you're going to be doing for 2023?
Yeah, I can reveal some stuff. Just like the Heart of Darkness, it's going to be a story that's connected, written by the same person and drawn by the same person. And I guess that narrows it down, but I'm not going to tell anything more. And it's a Team Phantom, of course. It's not based on anything else. And I will say no comment if you start saying different names.
So you said written by the same person and drawn by the same person.
Well, two different persons.
But all of the stories in the book, that is.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm missing. So say that again.
The same person has written all the stories, and the same person has drawn all the stories. And it's a Team Phantom thing.
Okay. So it's.
But I will be saying no comment if you start name dropping different artists.
But would it be like approximately the same page count?
A bit shorter, but still what I consider a brick of a book. It's going to be a hardback. Because we usually do the soft cover books. We did Nemesis of Evil, or Evil's Nemesis last year. And we're going to do a soft cover book again this year as well, because that's our standard thing. And other than that, me and Andreas have been brainstorming different thicker hardcover books. And we have a lot of ideas, but since it's such a big project and there are a lot of different factors that have to line up for the book to actually be produced, we don't know how many years we can continue with that kind of production. But it would be amazing if we could do it this year and next year and the year after that, but only time can tell. Yeah, it's quite interesting with the Heart of Darkness that we actually managed to get it through, because it was a lot of work from both mine and Andreas' side to get everything in order for it to come out. And I'm glad that it's been received so well.
So, okay, so a few things. First of all, just to confirm that, yes, there will be another hardcover collection. Contents creator team to be announced. Okay, so Mikael, have you thought of anything?
I have a guess what it could be, but I'm not gonna take it now.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I must admit, I've drawn a bit of a blank. A larger collection. I was initially thinking something like maybe like the Habinc series, but that's different creators. I'm trying to think of. Maybe it could be that's different creators. I was thinking, the stories about the first Phantom where Ulf and Jamie, Valve extended like the lore. So I was thinking that, but that was created by, I think that was done by different creators as well. So
it's not that thick.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So we'll but no, that's great to hear that there's going to be something else like that. And then you've also mentioned that there will be another soft cover album. I'm assuming there'll also be another Christmas album as well for 2023.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and we saw in the program initial one that it's going to be the same amount of issues that we have had for like 10 years now, or since we started with.
Can you say that once more?
The amount of issues of Fantomen, the regular ones.
Yeah. I think it's 19 issues, right? Or yeah, exactly. Nothing's going to change there, and there's not going to be any changes in page numbers. It's going to be 52 pages in the regular and 100 in the double issues, which I'm very happy that we'll get to keep.
So is that a bit of a non-negotiable for you?
Yes, in the sense that I don't have to negotiate about it like for every year. But if my supervisors come and say we have to cut this many pages off, would be hard for me to negotiate that, because there, as we said earlier, those are like factors and stuff that I can't really change that would affect me like that. But
Yeah, and
it
as we
has
said,
not been up for debate, so I don't think it's going to be any chance for it.
but as you said, there are so many things that are not related to the Phantom at all. It's in general for publishing both magazines and books, and I think it's something that all of us have to accept, that we are in the stage in history where you can produce. It doesn't always depend on the quality of the product that you produce when it comes to magazines and books, because you still have to fight the fact that people don't read the way they used to, or they don't read physical books like they used to, and all that leads to the costs of a comic book are like proportionally much higher now than they were decades ago. So all these factors mean that I'm not saying that we're producing the best comic book in the world, but you could produce the best comic book in the world and it still wouldn't make a profit. It's just not based only on quality anymore.
Yeah, I think Tony DePaul was talking about basically the same thing with the strip. Like, he's seeing that we don't know when it's gonna end, and he just talked about that in this long article.
Yeah, and not to bring anything down, because really I don't think that me and Jacob can see that the end is coming, but realistically it's during our lifetime, so to speak. But it's not like we're not seeing a really bad situation now. We're just anticipating that it could come, and it could come for reasons that we don't have any control over. I mean, the pandemic was completely unpredictable, and especially what would happen during the pandemic. And the result, as we found out, was that magazine sales went up, especially subscriptions. Sales in stores were, of course, difficult during the pandemic, but subscriptions were up for not just the Phantom, but a lot of magazines. And that's stuff that you have absolutely no way of predicting. But the next big thing that happens in the world could be something that turns it all the way down instead, and we can't predict that now.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So are you just and I know you've got a job and all that, but I guess you can also say that you are custodians of the Phantom in Sweden. So, how do you see your role to try and preserve the magazine for as long as possible? What are some ways that you can do that, or whether it's by getting new fans, and how do you do that, or
I think it's a hard balance between appealing to a newer generation whilst not alienating another part of the of the readers, and it's really hard because I don't know. It's like you have to think about it every day, like work in new stuff. Like, I try to hire or find new artists and writers that are younger, in hopes of like getting their initial fan bases onto the team, and like just make them aware of the Phantom, and we did a democracy themed issue last year, which garnered some attention from media, and sadly people were like reacting with asking like, oh, I didn't know the Phantom still was a thing, and that kind of sucks, but that's still important to like keep showing the Phantom's face in different places, so people are aware that he exists, and hopefully picks up the magazine again, or buys it to a friend or a daughter or a son, and to make projects like the Heart of Darkness, and trying to like push it onto people who see comics as like a cultural tradition in Sweden. So it's a very hard question, and it's very hard to do it, I think. I don't know. What are you thinking, Andreas?
Well, I was going to say that hopefully the readers that have been with us for a long time and are like they know what they like and they want more of that. Hopefully they can understand that when you don't get attention from doing the same thing over and over. You get attention by doing something that stands out, and that means trying new artists that are not famous for the Phantom but can get attention from their own fan base. But then the older fans will think, this doesn't look like the Phantom I'm used to. But hopefully they can understand why we're doing it and realize that we're not going to do 19 issues that look like this, but we maybe do 1 or 2 issues per year that get attention outside the normal fan base to either bring in new fans or remind old fans that, hey, we're still around. And maybe, so it can be a hit or miss, but that is the only way to really get attention, is to do something that stands out. We can't do just the same thing over and over and expect people that have stopped reading the Phantom to come back to us, or people that have never read the Phantom to find the Phantom. You have to do something that stands out at least once a year, basically.
So would that be an example of that be Janice Auden, where you got him on a couple of years ago, and he's become probably one of the more popular current Phantom artists at the moment?
Well, yeah, but that's not something that Janus Ordon. I mean, hiring a new artist like Ordon or something like that, that's still not something that gets attention outside the Phantom fan base. I'm talking about the stuff like the Pride issue, the Phantom political, the Swedish issue last year, and we did a press release about the Phantom being in black and white, or the 1000 story, or anniversaries like in 2016 when the 22nd Phantom storyline began. Those are the things that get picked up by media and that get traction in social media. But if you just do another story about the Phantom in the jungle, or another story about a historical Phantom fighting the Singh Brotherhood, that's not gonna go out into the media and get attention. But I mean, as I said, I hope that the longtime fans realize that we're not trying to get attention-grabbing stories or events in every issue. That's not the case. But if we never do that, we're only going to see a downward spiral.
So have you seen an increase in sales with, for example, the Phantom beating someone up with the rainbow flag, with the depression issue, with the Phantom going to Sweden, the political island issue, there was the depression issue a couple of years ago with the 22nd Phantom. They're what, half a dozen from the last 6-7 years. Do you see a spike in sales?
Yeah, there's definitely like small spikes. I think the Pride flag one and the depression one were maybe the bigger spikes of the last years. The one where the Phantom went to Sweden last year didn't really get that much of a sale increase. I think it was more like a
social awareness,
a publicity stunt in that case. But I think that's also important to remember that, like, when we do these kind of stunts, you have to realize that, yeah, maybe the newspapers will write about it, but how much does that actually sell comics? And can it be hurtful if something goes against like the core readers' not values, but their idea of the Phantom, or that they're feeling that we're focusing too much on spectacle or trying to stay relevant, they might stop buying the magazine. So you always have to look at the numbers of sales and how much publicity you get, and see if there's actually correlation. Because worst case, the Phantom just gets like written about a lot, but it doesn't really actually make more sales, if you understand how I mean.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. So 2023, what's your, lack of a better term, what's your stump for 2023?
I don't think there's going to be any stunt in the magazine.
Okay.
There's going to be a book stunt, I guess.
Sorry, what was that?
It might be something book related, but
okay.
we might have touched upon. No, but I don't think we haven't really. I think maybe one thing you could say, but again, this is not that big of a deal, really, is that we're experimenting with some new / old cover artists.
Yes.
Trying to it's not going to be a permanent shake-up in that, but there's going to be some new faces, some old faces, just to mix it up a bit. But other than that, I don't think there's anything. I don't know if am I missing something, Andreas?
I think you're right that we're not doing anything big and spectacular in that sense this year with the magazine. But you touched upon it before that we don't have a fixed goal of having new stories in every issue, but we're not far away from that. And as you said, we have instead a lot of new backup issues that backup comics that replace what would have been a reprint anyway. So it's new stories in the magazine, but it's not the Phantom, so which is important for the Swedish readers. But I think that we're gonna have some new creators on the stories as well, but mainly I'm looking at the plan now. I think that it's going to feel like we're a bit like last year, that we're really trying to make every issue a must-have issue, because there will be something in every issue that you don't get otherwise. And that is, I think, one of the main thoughts that I had when I joined, as a regular editor and not a replacement editor, that try to make every issue feel important to have.
But as an editor, do you also think every issue is a good starting point for a new reader that picks up its first Fantomen at the newsstand?
I mean, not when it comes to the longer stories that span more issues, of course. And I believe that was a bit of a problem even in the 90s when they did the original Heart of Darkness run, that there were fans that were complaining that they missed one issue or another or two issues, and suddenly they couldn't follow the Heart of Darkness story. So we try to not I don't want to have a bunch of new stories that you have to buy everything to follow the story. You have to be able to pick up a magazine once or twice. But we also do have some longer stories, like Pete Anderson's Bellapok that's been in through. We're doing that now, so there you obviously have to buy all of them to stay connected. But yeah.
Yeah, but it's not. Those stories are kind of loosely connected, and that's
true. That's true.
That goes for most of what we have planned now. It's new, but it's loosely connected or standalone new stories. So that, as you say, you can pick up an issue and you won't be in the middle of a 5-part storyline that's absolutely impossible to understand. But I also, as I said, for those who buy every issue, it's going to feel like a reward that there's always something new in every issue, especially for the subscribers, I suppose.
So no new Golden Rune or Ibis Mystery style sagas for 2023?
Not for 2023.
No.
Okay, not for 2023. What about 2024? There's our second no comment. Now you made mention of returning creators and maybe some new creators. Now, so far on your covers, we've seen Rafael Ruiz and Sal Veludo, who has come back to do some covers. And then last year we saw Alex Suviak do a story as well. And I'm assuming this is going to be another no comment answer. But is there any other creators you can tell us that are going to be new or returning that we might see in 2023?
Yeah, sure. There's going to be a new story by Anthony Spey, drawn by Anthony Spey, because I don't think he might have had one story last year, and I think he needs more stories because I really enjoy his style, and it's just been like complicated planning and other works that have come in between. But he's coming back. There's going to be one more. There's been one by Janusz, who's also started to doing covers because he made a cover last year, and he made a cover for number 4 that just came out in Sweden. He's going to do another cover and another story.
Who was that? Sorry,
Janusz Ordon.
Oh, yep. Yeah, really enjoy his work. It looks amazing in color. And then it looks just as good in black and white for the free readers as well.
Yeah, he's incredibly talented, and I personally really enjoyed his cover art. I don't know if you saw the one for Fantomen 16, where the Phantom is fighting a bunch of security personnel.
Is that the one where he's kind of getting out of his Mr. Walker outfit? Yeah, that got mentioned in our best of 2022 podcast by one of the reviewers.
Yeah, I'm a bit partial because it's based on my story, of course, but but I really enjoyed his, and I think his new cover was really good as well. So he might return. And then there's one artist that has never done anything for the Phantom that I want to have making a cover, but that's going to be in the end of the year, I think. Me and Andreas have not discussed that, but I think it's going to be perfect. I think it's going to work really well. And then we also have a new artist for the comics that has made one very, very short comic last year. Her name is Anna Weatherly, and what's interesting about her is that she is I think she's my age or younger, and she's still studying in art school. So she's like a very, very, very fresh comic book artist that is very talented, that has a unique style, that has made one story that I don't think exists in English yet, and she's hopefully going to be able to churn out 2 shorter, like 3 to 6 page Phantom stories. So it's going to be like small tidbits of story, and when she's ready she might have something bigger, but that's going to take a while. So we're trying to like introduce a bit of new blood into the system, but I mean, it's hard because once again with the budget I have a limited amount of jobs to give out, and I have to balance the new with the old, and there are some really old creators that have been with the Phantom for my lifetime ×2, you know. So you have to like respect them as well, and have them be able to like come in and do their thing because they're both popular and competent. But then you also have to like find the new ones and try to get them into Team Fantomen, you know.
Yeah, it's that real juggle.
Speaking of returning creators, I mean, technically we had David Bishop last year returning after a few years, and the issue that just came out here that you mentioned was written by Philip Madden, who also hasn't written for a couple of years. But that's the way the situation is now, that there are a lot of creators who have worked for Team Fantomen, but we don't produce as many stories, so they don't get one story every year. So there can be a gap of a few years between stories for some of the creators, but so to speak, there are some. I think there are some more returning creators this year as well. So yeah, there's going to be some both some familiar names this year and some new names.
Yeah, and some people who are like, connected to the Phantom or the comic book scene coming in and writing stories as well. You know who I'm thinking of, Andreas?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. Any chance of a name?
We're talking in code here.
Oh, there's our third no comment.
Yeah.
So Anna Weatherly, that she did the Evening in the Jungle in 22-23 last year, and it was written by Jimmy Wellen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mikael, was that the? I think you sent me a progress book. That was one by her, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yes.
that is true. That we got from the Stockholm International Comics thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, she's her style is more reminiscent of what is his name? Either it's Chester Brown or Dan Klaus. There is some like
Yeah.
alternative. It's more like where the shadows are like small lines instead of like gradients and stuff. So it's very different, but I think it worked pretty good. And the new one she's been working right now is really like becoming more and more Phantom like whilst keeping her
with her
old
style.
style.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's probably a good question. Wasn't on the run sheet, but I'll ask. You're talking about the Phantom style. Is that something that you have to, and we all know the story about artists having to basically copy Cy Barry's face. Is that something that you still have to implement from a writing, but also from a drawing artist perspective, where there's that Phantom style that they have to follow? Or is that a little bit looser these days?
I think it's a bit looser. I think it's very important to realize that there are a lot of Phantom artists that are beloved because of their style and because the way they draw the Phantom. So it's not like there, for example, at my company, we have a bunch of other, strip-sized comics like Beetle Bailey and stuff. And there it's really important to like keep the exact same style because you want to pretend like the original cartoonist never died, so there's just ghost drawers that like do the exact same kind of bear or cat or moose or whatever it is. But when it comes to the Phantom, we put the name of the artist and the writer on the cover. I'm pretty sure that Fru does that as well, and that is specifically to highlight who it is made it. And maybe there's a fan who doesn't buy every Fantomen, but then he sees, oh, it's a new Kari Leppänen story, I have to have this because I respect and love his art. So I think it's important to give the artists leeway to create their own version of the Phantom while sticking to some principles and guidelines, of course. But there should be some kind of artistic freedom, otherwise I think it would be kind of boring. You have to have that freedom.
Now, you made mention of publishing Fru stories. What do you look for in a Fru story to be able to publish it in a Fantomen story? Because obviously you haven't published every Fru story, so you must be selective in what you choose. And Andreas, this is probably a good question for you as well.
Yeah. I think it's the most important thing, like what I preferably like avoid and like is we try to stay away from the sequel/prequels. We do some of them if they're really, really good, but there comes the problem that Andreas mentioned in the beginning when it comes to like giving the fans what they want, because sometimes you think that you like love a story, you love a character, like is her name Princess Sin, I think? Yeah, and if you really love her, maybe you just want more and more and more and more stories with her as a character, but that kind of like saturates the idea of that character and makes it bland in the end. So I try to stay away from stuff that like, and I say this not trying to sound mean, but like if it looks like fan fiction, I don't really think it fits. I want it to be like a story that could work without the references to older stories.
Okay.
Unless it's really, really good. Like we're gonna reprint this story from Fru that's called Links of a Chain, I think, right,
Yep.
Andreas? And that's I mean that's a reference to an older story, of course. But it's not like it's just like a very small reference to those characters. It's not like a direct prequel or sequel to it. So I think it's very important to have a story that is like unique in its own way, even if it references back and forth.
Is it also hard in the sense that through obviously like they reprint the original, Lee Falk Barry newspaper story, where if you guys have printed that in the last 5 years, it might be, you can't really reprint it again. Is that another problem that?
Yeah. I try to keep track of the timing as well when it comes to connected stories. And in that case, it kind of works because we reprinted that story that it refers to in a Christmas album recently. So it's sort of fresh. But that's also like one of the main things that I look at now, that we want to, when we bring in the Fru stories, we don't want to shock the Swedish readers. So we pick the ones that feel like they fit in best with the Team Fantomen stories. And that means that it's mainly a focus on the stories that have been written by Pidde Andersson and myself. We also did Duncan Munro's trilogy that Jeff Weigel drew. So both artistically and story-wise, that it kind of feels like a Team Fantomen story. I have in the back of my mind an idea to get the readers used to the fact that we sometimes bring in something that looks a bit out of the ordinary, just to keep showing off new stories instead of bringing in reprints. But you quickly get a backlash from the traditional fans. Like last year when we did the Outlaws, which was written by Pidde Andersson, it feels very connected to the Team Fantomen and Lee Falk lore, but the art style by Rafael Dantas was a bit more cartoony than we were used to. And immediately you get the feedback like, what is this? This is not the Phantom, and stuff like that. And you try to calm them down and say, this is not the new style. We're going to see 19 issues. It's a one issue. Yeah. And if you read the story, if you read the text in the speech bubbles, you will find that this is very much a Phantom story. It's very much a traditional Phantom story even. But the art style is a bit more modern than those readers are used to. But I mean, that's what happened when Hans Lindahl began in 1983. His style was like nothing they had seen before. And when we brought in Ordon a couple of years ago, his style was also out of the ordinary. So sometimes you have to try these new artists as well and give them a chance. Like Jacob says, don't follow the Cyber template, do your own thing. And some people will not like new art styles, but sometimes a new art style can become like a fan favorite.
Yeah.
But in general, we are kind of cautious about the Fru stories in the sense that we bring in the stories that feel the most like Team Fantomen, and maybe if you think about it in long term, get readers used to the fact that we may reprint a foreign story. It could perhaps even be something other than Fru, but we haven't discussed this, me or Jacob. It's just that there are a lot of Phantom stories published in the world, and some of the stories are really good, but they don't fit into the Team Fantomen continuity, or they have an art style that doesn't look familiar. And I think that bringing in something like that now and then wouldn't hurt, if people can understand that this is not the new direction for the magazine as a whole. It's just something special that we bring to you. Kind of like when we did the King's Watch a few years back, when Mikael Lyck brought in King's Watch, even printed them on a different kind of paper as a supplement in the middle of the magazine. And of course, King's Watch is very, very different from any Phantom story that we make. It's like aliens and superheroes and Flash Gordon and Mandrake's magic and all that. But it was a limited thing, 5 issues. It was a good story if you pay attention to the story. And then it was done. And maybe we can do some stuff like that again. Maybe not 5 issues. Because long storylines also, as Jacob says, has their challenges with those that only buy an issue now and then. But maybe the occasional through story or a story from another creator that looks a bit different, feels a bit different, doesn't match the continuity of who the wife of the Phantom is and stuff like that. But that's not for 2023 or maybe even 2024. It's down the line.
Well, hopefully the Phantom Bible will be a bit more popular by then as well. I'm assuming when you talk about those, I'm assuming you're talking about stories like Moonstone, or maybe even the DC stories. Is that sort of like what you're talking about?
Yeah, but it's in the back of my hand because Hermes reprinted the whole DC series recently, so I reread them. One of those stories has been published in Sweden in a special anniversary special, and that's the kind of context that I mean. Like we could, when the Phantom celebrates an anniversary, it's a great time to show what kind of Phantom stories do other countries produce. So I mean this like in a one-off special kind of sense, and not something that becomes regular in every issue at least. Well, so you have the DC stories. Yeah, you had the DC stories and Moonstone. I was reminded of that because both Fru has reprinted some Moonstone stories, and the German publisher Sauberstern is doing a lot of Moonstone stories now also. The Moonstone stories have the problem that they are usually the best stories are part of a much longer storyline.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find a one-shot story that is good or really good.
I liked issue 26, which was the 13th Phantom. That wasn't bad. But anyway, that's getting distracted a little bit. We're 3 years away from 90 years as well, so maybe that could be the next anniversary.
Yeah.
Will we see a solution on the Sandal Singh drama saga?
What do you say, Andreas?
Can I decide that?
That's what I heard. You heard it here first.
Well, yep, definitely.
We're working on it. I mean, there's stuff left unfinished by Mick and by the passing of Klaus and like stuff. There's stuff we have to like figure out, and we haven't forgotten any of it, but it might take some time because we want to do it justice.
Okay. So would that also be the 22nd Phantom saga as well that you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, okay. Are we going to see any stories featuring the Sandal Singh ongoing saga and also the 22nd Phantom saga in 2023?
No. I can be. Okay. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. No.
And it's like you say, we have to that those kind of stories take some more thought behind them, especially. Klaus had already left it in the hands of others because he retired, but it's still a different situation after he passed. It kind of. I don't know. It affected us. Is what I can say, and I don't know. We probably, if Klaus had still been alive, compared to now when he isn't, probably will affect how we write the rest of the story. Even if we wouldn't have any contact with him. I mean, it's difficult to explain, but he left it in the hands of others. But now that we know that he isn't around, I think it affects how we think about it going forward, and it kind of makes it a bit more we would take it serious, sensitive, or we would have taken it seriously no matter what, but now it kind of becomes like a legacy thing and not just like, hey, here's the fun thing that we're doing with the stuff that you started. What did you think about it? Now it's like we don't even know what he will think about it. And it's like his legacy in the sense that he created this thing that it became so talked about, and which is basically what you want when you create a story. I mean, you want to create stories that have an impact, even if it means that some of the people won't like it. But Klaus was also a kind of person that could take that. He could like take the hits from fans that were traditionalists, and he knew that you can't. I mean, he was also an expert on doing very traditional Phantom stories. But that are very classic in themes. But he could also do these stories that were way out of the box. We just feel that it's
still too early.
It's a bit more. Well, we're talking about it, but there used to be a couple of years gap between these parts anyway, even when Klaus was writing them. They in the last few years they haven't produced 20-second Phantom or Sandal Singh stories every year anyway, so nothing has changed that in that sense, but we are talking about it in a more profound way now that we know that this is a legacy thing rather than something that we could chat with the class at the book fair in Gothenburg and say, hey, what did you think about the ending we made to your story? And he could say, it was crap. Ha ha ha. Now it's like we don't have that chance anymore, and it kind of affects how we think about it, I think.
Now, this is probably a question you're not going to be able to answer, but do we have any idea, while we're talking about Klaus, do we have any idea where he was leaning about? Was the Phantom the father of Sandal Singh's son? And where was the 21st Phantom? Do we have any idea about those two questions?
I can honestly say that I have no idea. I was never filled in on that information. I don't know. Andreas probably would say no comment.
I would say no comment, and I think the person that knows the most is Mikael Sol, because he was Klaus's editor when they started this. But we'll leave it at that. And as I said, Klaus was very clear about when he retired that we don't have to follow any of his intentions. We don't have to know his intentions. But I think that maybe now when the situation is like it is, we will probably have a sit down with Mikael and like discuss the things that they discussed and then decide where we go.
Okay. And do you know, I mean, I guess you don't know, but do you just want to tie the knot or continue with the storyline and go further?
I think we discussed this on our meeting last time, me and Andreas, and I think we said like 4 or 6 more stories or something, because we don't want to tie it up being like, oh, he was there all the time or something, because it didn't feel like it was ending with the last 2 like showdown at the Paradise Hotel. That didn't feel like it was close to any ending, so it would be doing the fans a disservice if we just wrapped it up in 40 pages, you know. So I think it's gonna take a while to get to the ending, depending on what kind of information we get from Mikael, of course. Maybe it was a really simple solution in the end, but I don't think so. I think it is going to be a longer story.
So do you have a writer in mind? It might even be one of yous who will be taking over the 22nd Phantom saga?
We do have a writer in mind. I'm not going to say who it is yet, but this is like a writer that like me and Mikael were discussing when I took over, and me and Andreas have discussed this as well. But regardless who it is, I think we're going to be very nosy in the production, more than we already are. I mean, the 2 of us both usually read the stories. I usually do a lot of editing to make the story a bit tighter and better. But in these stories, we're really gonna make sure that like it feels right. So we're both gonna be working closely with the author.
And
Okay.
especially from my point of view, that it connects to the other stories in a logical sense.
Yes, exactly.
Basically, and that since it will inevitably be a new writer, that is something that a lot of things can be forgotten or missed. So we are going to need, and of course, Mikael, who is our proofreader, he will also down the line have some responsibility of spotting errors or continuity gaps or something like that.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah.
Because, well, I reckon it is a bit of pressure because it's such a. The thing that I enjoy about the series is that it references to a lot of older stories from Team Fantomen, but also the Lee Falk stories. There's a lot of classic Phantom, a lot of reference to Phantom stories. So, in my opinion, you have got to get someone who knows the Phantom very, very well to be able to even match and to be able to continue on where Klaus was going.
Yeah. It might be, maybe we should even do it like it's this author and Andreas Eriksson or something. So, so like we get really into it just to make all those connections. Because as we've said earlier, like the people who work with the Phantom aren't always specifically fans themselves. I struggle a lot with that when I write my stories, to actually make it connect to the bigger picture, because I don't have every answer or like every connection in front of me. So that might be an idea we have to do.
Yeah, but actually that's a fun thing to mention. I mentioned that Mikael is our proofreader at the Fantomen magazine, which was the position I had before when Mikael Sul was editor. And I had the same idea as Mikael Sul had, that you don't want a proofreader that just spots spelling errors. You want someone who is a fan, who understands the plot line and can be like a backup editor almost. And I don't think that people realize how much extra we add late in the production when it comes to connecting it to the overall picture. I mean, especially when we do a historical story. In the script, it may not always even be specified which Phantom it is. It could just be the Phantom that is active in the 1800s is what the script says. And then it's up to us to connect it with, well, which Phantom, when does this take place, when does it make sense? Okay, the Phantom is going to Europe again. Can we connect it to another thing? Oh yeah, he was going, in this story, he was traveling to Europe. This could happen during the same trip, so he doesn't have to go back and forth in the same year. And a lot of those details are added, like it could be even in the stage of proofreading when we are finishing up the text and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the Phantom Bible comes in as well. Because I think Mikael, you had a sheet which has now been added to the Phantom Bible, but you had like a sheet of which Phantom used which weapons, and that was the type of stuff that you had to look at. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I also asked you to add all the colors of the horses and the wife's hair colors and eye colors.
Yeah, because like for instance, you might do one of the wives as redhead in one story, and then now obviously, with someone called Flame, you would expect her to be a redhead, but not everyone's called Blondie or or something like that. So they're all the type of things that I guess you have to look for. Mikael, do you have any specific 2023 questions? Any that I've missed? We've still got some more random Fantomen questions that we want to ask.
Yeah, let's move to that.
Okay, so we've talked about Klaus Murphy, who sadly is no longer with us, and the hole that he left us. Just quickly, are we going down the path of that we have to have multiple writers pick up the slack of Klaus, who was the main writer before? Is that kind of like the path that we're choosing?
Yeah, I don't think we have any writer that we see as the main writer anymore in the same way that Klaus was. There are some good writers that I wouldn't say like prioritized, because I try to spread it out as much as possible. But I've been really enjoying Pidde Andersson, his works recently, with the Fru ones specifically, and I know he writes a million stuff for my company in general, so I might want to, because I don't think he's written a Phantom story for Egmont yet.
No.
Yeah, it's one of those ironic kind of funny things. You're having a Sweden writing story for an Australian publisher who's never had one.
But actually, that is a consequence of how things were before, with Klaus being the main writer while the number of stories was decreasing, and in the end he wrote almost all the new stories, with the exception of one or two by Mikael Sol and myself or someone else now and then. But that also meant that someone like Pidde, who has been trying to get into Team Fantomen for years or maybe even decades, he found a quicker way by going to Fru, which I also did. I also got I was published by Egmont first, but I sold my first script to Fru. And that was sort of because all the spots were taken already at Team Fantomen. And we're not doing that the same way now with one writer filling almost all the spots. Instead, we will have several writers doing 1 or 2 issues per year, and that means that there is a big responsibility for the editors to keep the overall picture.
Yeah. I'm not sure Peter Anderson will like you saying that he spent decades, because that will probably tell everyone just how old he is. One of the things I love as a collector, and Mikael would know this, is I love the extras that used to be in the Fantomen magazine back in the 70s, 80s, and in the 90s. Now, will we ever see extras or supplements in the magazines again, besides the 2 posters that we see in issue 1 and 16, I think it is?
Not right now. It's the same problem as we discussed earlier, with like lower sales and inflation and stuff. There's just no budget for to keep that kind of production going when it comes to the Phantom. I mean, Egmont does that a lot for like Lego or other products, but those are like sold like maybe 10 or 20 times more issues than we do. So there's no market for that, and it's kind of sad, because back in the day we had the Phantom Club as well, where you had your number and you could like get some benefits and even a cake, and that would be fun to do. But then I think we'd need to, first of all, I would have to work only with the Phantom to like keep up with all that editorial work together with Andreas. So it's just like a too little budget and too little time for us to respectively to have that ongoing, sadly.
But I think that we do
towels.
Yeah, towels. Yeah, are you gonna send a towel with the magazine?
I mean, if you subscribe,
but I was gonna say, I think that me and Jacob, what we do well is that we do creative things regardless of how small the budget is. Like, for example, we don't have a budget to do more supplements than the posters you mentioned, but for the publishing schedule poster in issue 1 this year, it's not just a random illustration. It's like a scene from the major treasure room with a list of the items and all of that. So that's like it fits within the same budget, because you're going to have a new illustration regardless of what. But there was a lot more research done by me and Jacob before the artist did the work to make a poster that also had some content that was special. And the same with the publishing schedule poster the year before that, which referenced the anniversary of the Phantom daily strip being published in a Swedish newspaper, where we the artwork of that poster is Mr. Walker. It's from when he is in Stockholm during the Depression story, actually.
I didn't know
And
that.
he's reading a newspaper, and the front page of the newspaper, it is the same newspaper that publishes the Phantom Daily Strip. We contacted them and got the rights to use their real logo and design on the front page. And the news story on the front page is from when the Phantom is in Stockholm. It's the news report about the action that went on the day before, which was when it was in Stockholm.
You see a little a scene from that the gallery when it gets robbed. So there's a lot of like small references for the real nerds to get into.
Regardless,
I missed that.
Yeah. But regardless if it's we're talking about posters or covers or stories from through or reprints, even we try to add some extra value, and I think that we do that quite well. That's a heads up for fans and collectors that take an extra look on the last 2 publishing schedule posters, and you will find that this is not just some random artwork that could have been used as a cover or something. This is a lot of thought went into producing these posters that are, they still cost the same because the artist is going to make the artwork anyway, but the content, the motif is like specifically aimed for the dedicated fans.
All right, now I definitely know this is going to be a no comment option. So, question: we've talked a little bit about selling issues and budget and stuff like that. Without, and I'm not even sure if you know the exact figures, but is there any chance of you telling me how many issues you roughly sell? How many you per? Are we talking about 50,000, 10,000? Give me a wink. 20,000?
I'll say no comment, but my budget for this year has not changed from the last 2 years, and that's usually like, something that implicates whether it's going good or well. So we're stable, and it's going good.
So your budget would decrease if the subscription numbers were, or the readership numbers were decreasing by a fair bit.
If it would be like a significant drop, I mean, that's just like, basic economics. Like if it doesn't sell,
but it could also decrease for other reasons, which was what we were talking about. Like the paper costs, the printing costs could go, if they go up 20 to 50%, that could mean that the budget goes down, and it doesn't mean that the sales are down.
No, but we're stable. It's going good. I can say that.
Oh, that's good.
If you would rank like the revenue stream of subscription, loose issue sales, and digital version on Flip, is it like?
Subscription is the strongest still. That has always been the big one when it comes to Sweden in general. After that, I think it's loose. Or I don't know. It's very hard to know with Flip, because I think when you subscribe, you technically get it on Flip as well. So it's very hard to like know which of those numbers are duplicates and not. Especially also because if you have a Flip, you can also read other things, and I'm not sure how those statistics are implemented. But it's definitely, as regular subscriptions, that is the biggest thing.
Well, that's good. That's good. I suppose while we're talking about that, there's a lot of fans outside of Sweden that read the comic. I can think of, straight top of my head, people that I talk to at least once or twice a week. There's at least a dozen of those that get subscriptions as well. What's the best option for, say, someone from Australia or the US or something like that? If they want a hard copy of the Fantomen comic, what would be the best way for them to order a subscription?
I'm not sure. Do you know? I mean,
well, you can subscribe through the Egmont website. It's not adapted for. It's adapted for Swedish people living abroad, so it's not.
It's not
It's
in
still in
English.
it's Swedish, but you can get through it, and then you will get every issue sent to you. But I think that, economically speaking, if you could get in touch with a collector in Sweden who starts a subscription in Sweden and he collects the issues in a pile and ship a couple of packages a year, you probably could get it cheaper that way.
Yeah, probably.
And
I
then
mean,
you
there are
also-
also resellers.
Yeah.
There's resellers also in Sweden that's buy every copy and can sell it. So even if you don't want to have that kind of connection, you can still get them.
Yeah, and you made mention of Flip as well, which is an online. Do they have an app, or is it?
Yeah, it's an app, I think. I don't use it myself. I get it.
So it's an app,
Yeah.
and you can buy a digital subscription and read the comic on your computer or on your phone as well.
Yeah,
I read it in the browser.
It stores 1 year from the last issue. So if issue 4 came out now, that means that up till issue 5, 2022 is still available. And then when number 5 comes out, then it's, So you get a backlog that it's pretty good.
And it's a lot cheaper, I'm assuming.
I mean, it will be cheaper because you get all the other comics and all the other magazines, all in Swedish, of course. But since they're included, so it's a monthly payment, but you get more content, just like with Spotify or any other kind of streaming service. So in that sense, it's very affordable.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I know
I would
other
recommend.
fans. The hard copy. Oh, so you recommend?
Yeah, I'd recommend the
hard
hard copy because I think it's something special about having it and flipping through the papers. Even though it's harder to get.
Yeah, totally agree. I think I've got about 300-400 of the Fantomen comics. I love them. I will make mention. You were talking before, Andreas, about the King's Watch issues. Please don't do it like that again because that's not very good. Putting them in boxes or filing cabinets because it was that inch taller. So from a collector's point of
collectors hate it, but you see that a lot in Swedish magazine stands, not just for the Phantom, but or comic books in general. But other magazines often have this little extra thing that makes their magazine
you get
a
two
bit
above
taller.
The folds.
Yeah, you get a bit taller in the newsstands, and you often have like this text that says that there's something special in this issue, and I think it does help in the sales of issues in the newsstands.
Yeah. Just us poor collectors don't like that extra bit.
We don't have any plans for anything like that now. No.
Now, so we've talked a little bit about continuity and stuff, and this is probably a question more for Mikael and Andreas, but if there's a continuity issue, what do you refer to or what do you lean towards? Is it a fork or is it a Team Fantomen?
Well, the way I would say that the way they are published in Fantomen, I mean, in the Fantomen magazine, it's not Team Fantomen stories versus Lee Falk stories. It's incorporated, which means that, which most often means that the Lee Falk stories were edited. Either that Lee Falk would have like a throwaway line here about the 10th Phantom married that woman, and that totally contradicts what he had written 10 years before. And in the meantime, Team Fantomen has made 5 stories about another wife, and then it's like, what happens now? They usually just took out that panel or changed the text in the panel to keep it consistent in the Fantomen magazine. So we have basically a very consistent continuity if you look at how the newspaper stories were presented in the Fantomen magazine. So that is what we're looking at mostly. And I would say that's also when I said that we're looking at true stories or stories from other publishers, they have to fit into that continuity.
Yep.
For now, I don't think that, as I said, through the editorial text in the magazine, I try to like warm up the readers sometimes to the fact that there are other publishers outside of Sweden that do stuff, and that we maybe bring it in like a special now and then. But for the most part, it has to like fit in the continuity, and that's I know that has been a bit of a discussion that, you know, Lee Falk wasn't always very consistent, and he sort of gets away with it because he was the creator, and a lot of people think that he had the right to change his continuity along the way. But I don't think that he did it on purpose. I think that a lot of the changes that Lee Falk did was just he didn't remember, and the editors at King Features didn't pay attention to continuity. So if someone had just seen the scripts before they were sent to an artist and said, well, actually, this woman married another Phantom in the past, so maybe you should keep it the same. I think the Lee Falk would have said, sure, because that was not the point of the story. He wasn't trying to actively change things. It just happened because no one kept track of what he wrote during the 60 years that he wrote them, except the editors at Fantomen in Sweden. But then it was too late, so their only option was to like cut and paste in the stories that he made when they presented it to Swedish readers.
So Lee Falk needed to hire us back in the day.
He could have done that. I mean, if he had a fanboy near him and that just could check the continuity issues, I don't think there would have been many issues, because I don't think that was the purpose of the changes. At the same time, I agree that we shouldn't get locked down in details like that. If it's a good story, it's a good story. But me and Jacob, we can't get away with just making a good story and be sloppy with the details. That's just a fact. We have to show that we pay attention to the details, and I think that we have to show that we at least try to make it work in the bigger context. We don't have to succeed every time, because not even Ulf Granberg succeeded every time. There are errors in the past Team Fantomen stories as well, but we could never get away with saying like, we don't care about it. And I remember, as a comparison, when the Moonstone stories came out and they started to make historical stories. It's usually in the historical stories that the continuity becomes a problem, so to speak. And when Moonstone started to make historical stories, they very quickly started to contradict themselves. Like they made less than 40 historical stories, and there are contradictions everywhere. And I even contacted them. I don't remember if it was on a forum or an email, but they just answered back that we don't have a continuity for the historical stories. They didn't pay attention to it. So
they didn't have a Phantom Bible.
They didn't have a Phantom Bible. They didn't have a Phantom Wiki. They didn't have a continuity editor for that kind of stuff. It was all up to the writers themselves, and they didn't read, the other Moonstone stories. So like you had, I think Julie appeared in like 3 stories, and each story has a widely different idea of how her family life is and things that happened like after the Lee Falk origin story about Julie. And that was, to me, it's inexplicable that you do that like with your own creation. I can understand that you can sort of separate it from Lee Falk and say that we can't keep up with Lee Falk, but here's our version. But you should keep that version consistent anyway on those details, especially when you do not that many stories and within a limited time frame. And that's, as I said, that's something we can't get away with, because we have diehard fans in Sweden that will definitely complain if we miss the obvious details anyway. And that's something that Jacob doesn't. I don't think that anyone expects him to be that continuity nerd like we are. So that's where we have it like in several stages. Like Jacob, he reads the scripts first and checks, is this a good story? Is it an exciting story? then I look at the plot and the script and like say that this doesn't match at all. You have to change this and this, but you know, the plot line is still good, but the continuity details are a bit off. And then the final stage is when Mikael is joining us for the proofreading, and then now we're talking about like 2 weeks before print. That's when we're checking details like the hair color of the wives and the color of the horses and the eye color and how it does it fit with other stories that are set in the same time period, if we have missed that before anyway. So yeah, we spend a lot of time on it, and some readers wouldn't care at all if there were contradictions, but there are so many readers that do care that if we deliberately stopped paying attention to it, they would spot it immediately and they would complain, because now and then something does slip through the cracks and we get told about it.
So,
yeah, I also think that we have, or you, Andreas, have a bit different view than Mikael Sol had before, because like there was this 17 years where we didn't have Loaga as president, and I mean there was so many daily strips that they just edited him out and put Sandal there, or just changed the text, and now it feels like we try to do so little work as possible on the daily stories. I mean, we try to keep them as close to the original as possible. And yeah, I remember we did the reprint of, I think it was the founding of the Jungle Patrol, where there is one panel with this Phantom Viking or something, and it's like doesn't make sense, the folk what he wrote, and we just did we wrote it as what's it called, asterisk note from the publisher. That's true. That a main difference, if we circle back to our history with working with the Phantom, I have been doing freelance work for many years, and back in 2016 I was temporarily editor for the first time, and back then it was the normal was that all newspaper strips were edited. It had nothing to do with continuity. It was mainly to just take away the repetition panels, you know, tighten it up, make it feel more like a comic book story than a newspaper strip story. So that was a lot of my work when I was filling in in 2016, was going through the newspaper strip stories and like crossing out panels and you know, just tightening up the action and all that. Now that's one of the things that I mean that the readers we have today have slowly been adjusted to accepting that Phantom stories are produced from different sources and they look a bit different, and that is something that we talk about in the editorial texts to explain this. So now they accept that we run the daily strip stories unedited, the Sunday strip stories unedited, but when a contradiction comes up because we leave it unedited, like you say, the easiest way now is just to mention it outside the story, either in the editorial pages or a footnote, instead of in the old days you would have cut out that panel, or you would have rewritten the text, or you might have even taken in another artist and redrawn the art to make it feel like it fit in with the Team Fantomen continuity. So it's I mean, some of this is probably based on economical necessity, because there was a lot of work done on the newspaper strip stories before. But I also think that the readers understand where we're coming from today, so they don't even need all that corrections and continuity fixes of the newspaper strip stories. And a lot of readers, I think, appreciate that they get it unedited, like it was supposed to be, basically.
Yeah, so it's I think it's partially the readership has changed compared to back in the 70s and 80s. The readers were kids mainly. Like the average age of a reader was perhaps 12 years old, and for them it's confusing if it's widely different Phantom continuities. But the readers we have today, a lot of them are still the same readers that began when they were 12 and now they are 30 or 40. They understand what goes on behind the scenes, and they can like separate the newspaper strip story from a Team Fantomen story. But also, when and if new readers begin reading the Phantom or comics in general today, they have a different awareness of how fiction is produced. Like back in the 60s, the stories weren't even signed. You didn't even know who the artist and writer was. But that changed in the 70s and 80s, and today, regardless if you have stayed on since back then or if you're a new reader, you have a different awareness of how comics, TV series, movies, video games are produced. So you look at it differently, and you're not confused by the fact that the story I read in last issue seemed to be looking different than the story I read in this issue. You kind of understand that the last story ran in newspapers in the United States, and this story has been specifically made for the Fantomen magazine in Sweden. And people, our readers, can understand that.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because that's something that I recognize in myself from when I was like 12 years old and I was subscribing to Spider-Man. And I got so frustrated all the time when I was reading some stories and then I got a new magazine and the stories were not connected. Because as you said, I couldn't put those two things together, that this is not one cohesive story written and drawn by the exact same people. But now as an editor, I'm just, looking back at myself and being like, oh, you were so stupid, Jacob. It's so complex, this work. But yeah, I believe our readers are much more like aware, especially like the Phantom enthusiasts are really aware of exactly who made what and from which country it originates. And also in the latest issue, number 4, we even mention it in the leader text that we explicitly contacted Tony DePaul to discuss his future plans with Kit in Himalaya, so we could make a Team Fantomen story that took place in that setting without contradicting any future things.
Oh, there you go. You just gave us another exclusive. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
That's
I did
cool.
think about that. Yeah, but that's true. We have, back in the day, Ulf Granberg and King Features worked completely separately on producing stories, and you had to sort of do the edits on already published stories to make them fit together. But now we can be in contact with Fru, with Tony, and sort of figure out some of these stuff before, because the same thing goes for Fru, of course. They would rather publish stories by us that fit in nicely with the rest of the stories. So we try our best to keep it consistent, but again, if we don't, I think that the readers today are a bit more mature in the sense that they can understand that this might not match up completely. Because we are producing it in different countries, for different mediums, different formats. So yeah, I think that we don't have to be we don't have to keep it consistent between the versions. Like Team Fantomen and King Features, we can get away with showing things differently. But within the Team Fantomen universe, we definitely can't get away with ignoring our own past stories. That's where we have to keep the continuity crystal clear.
Just an anecdote that I remember when we did, I think it was the Duncan Monroe stories. And in Sweden, we have a different word for uncle on your mother's side and on your father's side. And we didn't know which one it was, so Andreas talked with Duncan, and then it became canon from the Swedish side that wasn't in the English version, because it's the same word basically.
There's a lot of things that we could have go on. I'm sure we could probably talk for another hour. But I know you guys are, as we're recording, for those who don't know, but they're actually at work. The three of you, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time, because I'm sure your emails are piling up as we're talking. We've talked a little bit about this before, Jacob, before you rocked up. So Andreas has had the last 2 hours to think about this. So sorry for putting you on the spot. Now, we've talked a lot about Ulf Granberg, talked about Mikael Sol, and now who are past editors. Ulf is kind of like the grandfather. He's the godfather, I guess you probably should say, of the Phantom editors around the world. He's left such a huge legacy. And look, I'm sure we would all like to be able to leave a legacy, an imprint on the character that we're involved with as well. So Ulf filled many holes left by Lee Falk and built on the legacy. According to some reports, when he was editor, there was over 300,000 comics per issue that was printed and sold. That's humongous. And then you have Mikael Sol, where he had a yearly media attention grabber that would be in the media, like, for instance, the 22nd Phantom, the Flag cover, the Political Island, the Depression story, and stuff like that as well. And then also he oversaw Sandal Singh and the 22nd Phantom as well. So, and I know you're still fairly early in the piece, and this is probably a 5-10 year goal, but what would you like to see your legacy be, or your imprint left on the Phantom? Andreas, I'll ask you first, seeing you've had last 2 hours to think about this question.
Well, I think that what I'm trying to do is make the magazine feel alive, that we're showing off new stuff, and that we show that the people working on it care, and we work hard on what we do. So just try to fill the magazine with new and interesting stuff, and I care less about where it comes from. I think that we have to accept that we can't fill the year with 19 new Team Fantomen stories every year. But if we can find like 5 to 10 stories from Fru or other publishers or something like that, as well as interesting and new backup comics, because that is also very important for the Fantomen magazine. It's not just about the Phantom. Avoid the feeling like Jacob said, it would be so easy to turn it into a all reprint magazine, like a zombie magazine that just reprints the same stories. Like you could pick an issue 20 years back in time, and then you just take the same sequence of stories and run it. It would probably actually work out better than people think, because a lot of people that buy the Phantom. We have.
It would probably work, and we don't want to go there.
No, we don't want to go there, and I think that's the struggle that Jacob has to make more often than I do. That he has to fight for, actually proving that there is a worth in producing new stuff. For example, that we can take the new stories and then put them into nice books. Because if you don't do new stories, and if you don't do new stories that actually make a worthwhile collection, then you don't have that extra profit. If you only repeat the same stories over and over in the magazine, you never will have new material for the books, for example. So I'm just like Jacob described our work process by me asking for things and he shrinking it down to fit the budget. But it usually still ends up when, we both want it to feel as new and fresh as possible. So we do creative solutions to stay within the budget, but not just fill it with the reprints.
So you're the fun dad, Andreas, and Jacob's the fun police.
Yeah.
So, Jacob, what's the legacy or the imprint you would like to see you leave on the Phantom?
Well, first of all, as Andreas mentioned, to keep it alive and fun for the readers. to say that I want the magazine to exist when I leave the company, that feels like a low bar. Like I want it to be fun and engaging, and hopefully like in a better place where it is now. Although like despite all the problems in the world, but then on a more personal level, I think the Heart of Darkness book is already like one stepping stone there. I want to create products beyond the magazine that like are placed on the top shelf in the bookshelf on display, like that really shows how much creative genius has been put in the Team Phantom story. Because as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, a lot of Swedish people think that the Phantom is Swedish. And when it comes to Team Fantomen, it truly is that, even though Team Fantomen is like an international team, but there's like, this is the product of the Swedish team and the Swedish project leaders pulling artistic people from all across the world and creating these nice, beautiful books that can stand the test of time. So as I mentioned, we might be cooking something up this year, and I want to just keep producing these books. I want that to be my niche. I don't have to like, go beyond Ulf Granberg, which I don't think is possible. But I still want to like do something that's typically me, like every project leader has their own thing that they're remembered by. And I feel like we're already on the path of like, this is the deluxe cover era where the nice, really expensive
collector edition hardcover. Yeah. Well, I know I was talking to Andreas. We were talking about the Mitten book, and we were talking about it, and I said, "Oh, this is a really good book." And he goes, "Oh, just you wait. The Heart of Darkness one's going to be just as good." And I said, "Mate, you're setting yourself up for a fall because this is a really nice book." And he goes, "No, we'll be fine. We'll get there. We'll get there." And I have to admit, you did a good job with that.
Yeah, thank you. I got an email from Hans Lindahl. Because we used some of his artwork in the book, because we sent him a copy, and he said congratulations to me and Andreas for making such a good book, and that it really showed that this was not just something put together by some people trying to make a quick buck. This was actual work behind it, and that really meant a lot to me. Because there are other projects I work with that are much quicker made, where I don't have to think that much, but this was really like my first project where I really put my all into it. It was a big risk also, and it turned out to be a good reward. So I
think that maybe we should mention another person that has been very important but isn't specifically Phantom connected, and that's the art director at Egmont, Mattias Mattsson.
Yes.
Because he has redesigned the look of the magazine. He designs the books, especially the Heart of Darkness, but also the other books, like the overall design. And he's not, I don't know if he's a Phantom fan, because we never talk about the details in the stories. He's the art director, so he looks at the design and the graphics, and not just for the Phantom, but for, I think, almost all of the Egmont line. But the reason that the books look so good, the reason that the Heart of Darkness has the design that it has, is because you and Mattias have been having that discussion. I don't get involved very much in the design issues with either the magazine or the books. I just supply the content, but in cooperation with Mattias, you make it look good as well.
Yeah, he was the one pushing for the emblem on the front and everything on the back, which is just like the tiniest details, that really make the book stand out so more.
Yeah, the embossed part there, and I think he also convinced you to do the numbering, because you had to do it by hand. And,
exactly.
And he had done it before on the other collector's editions, like not Phantom books. But I heard that you had to personally stamp the 1,000 copies with a number.
Oh, wow, really? So I'm not sure if you can see it on YouTube. But hopefully you can see there with the light, with the embossing down the side. There's the embossing. Is that a debossing because you're depressing?
Yeah,
Is that what it's called?
What it's called. Yeah, I think
and
so.
Then,
but you really see, like, when you take off the
dust jacket
folder, it looks like an ancient tomb, you know. And
yeah,
that was really the vibe we were trying to get.
And then there's the numbering that's been done individually. I know, Andreas, I think you did that with the Lee Falk Storyteller book. You did something similar.
It wasn't numbered, but it was stamped. Yes, because we had a stamp that came from Lee Falk's office. So every book that we sold, at least through the Scandinavian chapter, was stamped with a genuine Lee Falk stamp. So it was the next best thing to a signature.
Yeah. No, look, you've done a great job. Looking forward to what you're producing in 2023. Look, I really appreciate your time this afternoon for you gentlemen. Mikael, have you got any other questions or anything you want to
I'm super happy.
ask? Super happy. Did you learn anything new?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Have you figured out what stories is going to be in this year's hardcover collection yet?
I think it's some Team Fantomen stories that is older than 20 years.
Okay, all right.
That's my guess.
Jacob's still giving us he's just holding up a sign that says no comment now.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we only got about 4 or 5 no comments. So I appreciate you guys being so candid with us and open. Hopefully you, the listeners, who read the Fantomen comic or who have always been intrigued by it, whether you're from Australia or from India or other places around the world, Fantomen have such a rich history, and it's great to be able to learn what's coming up in 2023, but also to be able to learn something new about the history, but also yourselves, Jake and Andreas. So really appreciate you guys joining us. Is there anything before I sign off that you maybe want to make mention that you've just remembered, or something I haven't asked that you want to give us, or anything like that?
I have one thing. Jacob said in his introduction that he wasn't a big Phantom fan when he started working on the Phantom. And me and Jacob started working together in 2019 when Mikael was on sick leave. So we came in, did some issues. One of the things that we did was that we brought in a true story for the first time. So that was actually something we did when Mikael was away. But I would also say that the difference from those first phone calls and emails that I had with, and web meetings that I had with Jacob back in 2019, and just when he took over as project manager in 2021, he really did his homework. There's a big difference in how much Jacob knows about the Phantom lore and the Phantom stories and the Phantom creators, and that was really fun to see, and it makes it a lot of fun to work on the magazine, to feel how involved he has become in the Phantom, and not just it's not just like one of 10 magazines that he's working on. It's like he's a Phantom fan now, and he learns more and more about the stuff that us fans like to keep track of.
How far away is he from being a fanboy like the rest of us?
He's still got a long way to go, but he mainly is. I want to give him credit for, because that's not always on company time, I can imagine. I think there's a lot of hours spent on just absorbing Phantom lore and knowledge in his spare time.
Yeah, and listening to this podcast.
Oh, do you listen to many of the podcasts?
Yeah, when it comes to the Team Fantomen artists and authors, there's been some, I don't remember who they were, but I was considering, should I bring them back? And I needed to know something more about them. So I listened to the podcast where you talked with them, so I could get a perspective on what kind of person they were. So I think it's been a great like asset for me to learn more about the people that I work with and the magazine, how it's been received and what people want. I spent a lot of time like also hanging on Fantomen fan pages on Facebook. Rarely interact. I just, look at what people say about the magazine to keep track on like what the general like consensus is on the stories and what is liked and not liked and stuff. So I keep track and like try to stay updated as much as possible.
Awesome. No worries. Well, thank you, Andreas and Jacob, for your time. Kel, thank you also for joining us and asking all the hard questions.
Thank you.
So if you are listening to us, you can find us on chroniclechamber.com, which is our website. Our email address is chroniclechamber@gmail.com. If you want to be notified of new articles, you can either follow us on our social media pages, or you can sign up with your email address on our website. Now, you can also subscribe to us via YouTube or through your favourite podcast apps, including iTunes or Spotify. Guys, really appreciate your time today. The listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this, learning about Fantomen 2023, but also past Fantomen as well. For myself, thank you for listening and happy Fantomen.
Happy Fantomen.
Thank you. Bye.